Good morning, everybody, to the last of our leading through the revival seminars, webinars this year. I have to say, following yesterday's announcement, it doesn't feel like there's terribly much of a revival to lead through, but as a group of people, we are ever hopeful. Hoteliers are notoriously polite, hopeful and determined. And that's how I think we all feel at the moment. But we are delighted once again to have Kate Nicholls with us. It's marvelous to have someone who needs no introduction, because strangely enough, I was doing a seminar yesterday and they did an introduction and you don't recognize the person they're introducing. You think, really, Sam, where they got all that rubbish from? So I'm delighted I don't have to tell you all about Kate's background and her schooling and her family and where she's from and all the rest of it, because we all know Kate and we all thank her very much for everything she and her team are doing for us with government and banging the drum and sounding the trumpet. So I'm going to go straight in and let Kate bang her drum and sound her trumpet and really tell us what's going on. Kate, over to you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you to the Master Inholders for having me back on another webinar. And hopefully, if we continue banging the drum and sounding the trumpet, then the walls of Jericho might fall down and the government might finally look at doing some additional measures to support the hospitality industry. Because as you said at the start, this does feel like quite a bleak week for hospitality and particularly our hotels facing closure in parts of the country, but also the implications of that being felt across the country. And we've been working hard to make sure that that is understood by all decision makers across government. So just quickly, what I thought I would do is to set out where we are currently in the immediate situation, and then look ahead at what might come in the new year and how we can build and move back into that revival recovery piece and the messages we're taking to government on your behalf to be able to do that. But with the closure of London and large parts of the southeast being put into tier 3 yesterday, it does mean that currently we have about 75,000 premises across the UK that are either closed by legislation or unable to trade and closing voluntarily because their business has effectively been taken away from them. And then large parts of the hotel estate will fall into that latter category, technically able to open, unable to trade because of the restrictions, and unable to trade because consumer confidence has plummeted to such a level that the customers don't feel confident enough to book. And I think that that is the single biggest impact that our sector will feel for a long time as a result of Monday's announcement by the Health Secretary. We're now in a situation of weekly review of those tiers, and therefore any confidence that a consumer had of making a booking to come to your hotels in the new year or over Christmas, in making a booking to come to a restaurant and enjoy COVID secure hospitality, really, I think, shattered as a result of that announcement. So we do need to move the government urgently on. And just by way of background, that 75,000 premises is approximately 80% of UK hospitality unable to trade at the moment. For those that are open and trading, bars are minus 89%, restaurants minus 68%, and for hotels, again, minus 68, minus 70%, depending on the part of the country, but in many parts, minus 90%. So a very bleak picture. And I think for many parts of the country, they are seeing the impact of the London restrictions hitting their bookings and seeing cancellations. So what had been quite a positive period, the general feedback I'd had from hoteliers was that they were getting to 30 to 50% of occupancy levels for December and particularly the Christmas festive couple of weeks. And that's now gone rapidly back towards zero, both in the hotels in the capital that are now currently closed, but also being felt around the south of the country and more widespread too, where Londoners and people from Essex, Kent, other parts of the south that have just gone into lockdown at the home counties would have been travelling out for Christmas and now either feel that they can't, don't understand the new rules. And I think that that is an important point of what's going on here. or are just not willing to take the risk. And with today, the governments of the 4 devolved nations likely to make changes and make additional guidance recommendations around Christmas socialising, that confidence likely to take a nosedive even further. So just to set out where we are at the present moment in time and what is going to be happening over Christmas, and then look ahead to the review periods that we've got going through. The current tier restrictions are in place until the 2nd of February. The government will review those restrictions and the premises which fall within those restrictions in mid-January, and we will have another debate and a vote in Parliament. So in reality, that sort of closure and who's closed, who's open within the 3-tier restrictions and what can you do within the premises from a hospitality point of view, unlikely to change until towards the end of January. The geography of the tiers now reviewed on a weekly basis. The next review period, 23rd of December, then 30th, and then weekly throughout January. In reality, though, just as a sort of sense check, and I have had quite a lot of conversations with businesses throughout the last 2 or 3 days, that does not mean there is any hope of London hospitality reopening on the 23rd of January, or even highly likely the 30th. In the main, once an area goes into a tier, we know it takes 2 to 3 weeks before the effects of those tier restrictions are felt and seen in cases, and therefore we should be assuming that those areas that have gone into tier 3 restrictions today will be in place until at least early to mid-January. And with the festive period coming up and the scenes we've seen in retail, it's highly likely we will see cases spiking even further throughout January. So I do think that we are in this for the long haul. So that assessment that, you know, this could be changed on the 23rd of December, sorry, not likely at all. It could see other areas of the country going up or down tier restrictions on the 23rd, but that's really not very meaningful or helpful for most of hospitality businesses who will have made their decisions about what they're doing over the Christmas period by then. In terms of what London hotels can do now and those parts of the country that are in tier 3 restrictions, it means that it is business customers only. Other than a few notable exceptions for sort of elite sports, journalism, broadcasting, people who are long-term residents, which includes foreign visitors who've already arrived before and are completing their stay. Anybody who is here with you now can complete the stay if you choose to remain open. People who are moving house or are needing accommodation for urgent medical care or are self-isolating. Those are the only circumstances in which you can take bookings other than during the festive period. So that period of 22 to 28 days does see a small relaxation. So businesses that are in tier 3 will be able to take leisure bookings within that period. So you can accommodate the people, but your restaurants, your bars must remain closed. So it's room service only. It's consumption allowed in the public areas for takeaway only, and it's takeaway and delivery only from the rest of the business. So in reality, a very small reduction, but you could, if you wanted to, still continue to accommodate people. Crucially, for parts of the country that are in tier 2 and tier 3, the hotels in those areas will be able to take bookings from people who are from tier 3 area. So there's no requirement to cancel Christmas bookings from people who live in London. They can still travel out. The question is whether they will want to do so or whether they will just feel that they want to cancel their bookings now. And we are seeing high levels of cancellations across the southwest, Lake District and North Yorkshire's as well, and parts of the country that are already open. So I think there is a key question there as to whether bookings will continue to hold up. But you are allowed to take them outside of those period, but it's only the 22 to the 22nd to the 28th. So you can't do it over the new year. You are supposed to reject bookings from those people who live in a tier 3 area. The rest of the country, we are expecting a review today, potentially an announcement today or more likely tomorrow about what happens to the other tiers in the rest of the country. It's possible that areas in the southwest, particularly around Bristol, may go into tier 3, although it's looking less likely given that the government made the urgent announcements about tier 3 at the beginning of the week, but it's still a possibility. And equally, all eyes then on Manchester, the northwest, northeast, Yorkshire and Birmingham to see whether parts of those areas can move out into tier 2 where cases are declining. So potentially greater opportunities for hoteliers in those areas. As I say, then going forward, we have a review on the 23rd and the 30th, so a greater level of uncertainty, and then we move into the review of the tier structure. In terms of what we're working on with the government at the moment, therefore, we are inputting into and encouraging the government to adopt a tourism recovery plan, both looking at domestic tourism and placing a greater emphasis on domestic tourism, certainly for the first half of next year, and then also rebuilding our international tourism, and that's in 3 parts. So we're adding in a 4th part of emergency support that is needed right now to be able to get businesses through the next 2 to 3 months where there is going to be very restricted trading. We're also calling for, in the first review of the tiers in January, for hotels, holiday accommodation to be taken outside of the tier restrictions, and that the tier restrictions should differentiate between hotels and other forms of hospitality, and particularly high street hospitality. It's vital that we get our hotels an early opening date so that they can start to plan and that customers have the confidence to resume booking, particularly for the February half term and more importantly, the Easter holidays. We can't go into the start of the season and plan for the start of the season with this threat of weekly closure hanging over us, and customers need to have more confidence than just a week to be able to book in advance. So in that emergency tier, emergency strand of work, we're looking at additional emergency support, particularly a replacement for the coronavirus jobs retention bonus and a better form of grants. We're then looking at an early exit strategy for hotels to allow hotels to start rebooking and to move them into the same tier levels and tier treatment as events, so that we can encourage bookings back. And then moving forward to the rest of the tourism recovery plan, it's about reopening and the enablers for reopening in the first quarter to get the rest of hospitality restarted and to make sure that our F&B offerings and conference and banqueting can come back. So that's working with the government about vaccines. It's working about rapid testing rollout as an enabler. It's also working about the test and release systems that are in place to encourage international tourism back, making sure that that is more effective. And it's about restarting the domestic and the international campaigns and marketing to have a message about Britain being open. Second strand is around support when we get into the post-pandemic period. So government is seeing the first quarter of next year as still being within the pandemic period and needing to have some restrictions. So it's about how do we make that workable and how do we move forward. The second period post-pandemic is from the 1st of April. And that is about support for those businesses. We've now got a 1st of April cliff edge where furlough ends, rent moratoriums and rent protections and debt moratoriums end, which is critical for mortgage and interest payments. And we also have the resumption of the tax treatment, so an end to the time to pay and a start of the loan repayments coming through. And crucially, 1st of April, we have an end to the reduced rate of VAT for tourism services and an end to the business rates holiday. So you can see a perfect storm building up just at the point the government wants us to start reopening and getting back to full strength. We have an issue there. So our main focus is on extending that VAT cut for tourism related services to give a boost not just to consumer booking and consumer confidence, but also to help rebuild balance sheets, to give that confidence and certainty around investment decisions and staffing decisions going forward. And we're calling for that to be announced as soon as possible to give investor confidence back into the sector, and also an extension of the business rates holiday. And then the third strand is around demand. And there's a balance here that we're trying to get right with the government about when you start regenerating demand and going out and communicating about staycations and communicating international travel being reopened and international conferences being reopened. We need to make sure that the government protects the supply first. And that's why we've argued that they should do it in those two strands first and then look at demand, getting the messaging in early about being a safe space to socialise, and then getting out to our core markets to encourage them to have the confidence to rebook. So 3 big strands that we're working on with the government to make sure that we've got as good a grounding as we possibly can to protect the businesses in the short term, to help them grow in the medium term, and then to rebuild that market share in the longer term when restrictions lift and international tourism starts to come back from summer next year. I'm just going to pause there because that's probably as good a point as any to end and to then pick up with questions and answers about the specifics that you want to discuss and consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. I hope everybody can see me now. I've had to press various buttons and I'm so incompetent at doing that. Obviously, we've had a number of questions, and interestingly, before this, the most important question for most people was about this tier 3 people moving into tier 2 hotels. And I think if I've understood you right, and if we've all understood you right, basically, you can take tier 3 people during the Christmas relaxation, but apart from that, you're not supposed to. And Richard Ball, who was one of the people who'd asked about that and has now got the answer to that part, also says he understands that. So can we take a hotel booking? We understand we can take a hotel booking between the 22nd and the 28th from a resident of tier 3. Are they restricted to room service, etc., or can they use the hotel restaurant?
They can use the hotel restaurant and the hotel facilities. That operates as tier 2. So there's a temporary suspension. Normally, when you travel, you take your tier with you, if you like. But in these cases, in that exception for the 22nd to the 28th, they can be in the restaurant. Clearly, you need to have them as single household, and you would need to make sure that they do operate strictly as single household. But you are okay to just allow them to use the facilities. And equally, all of the health, beauty, spa, salon, gym, all of those facilities, even in 3, remain open and for use by residents and non-residents within tier 3. So it's worth making that point as well.
Thank you, Kate. There are of course inevitably more questions. I've got one here from Harry Murray. Kate, have you cited any action plans for vaccinations, which is key for lifting restrictions if the speedily target the most vulnerable? The virus is here to stay, like the flu. So basically, do we know whether we're really pushing on that? Have you seen any information?
Yes, the government has only published basic information, so I know the sort of tiers that they are working through as they get doses of the vaccination up. So the top priority is health care workers, social care workers, residents of care homes, those in hospital, the over 85s. So those are the first people who will be getting the vaccine and are getting the vaccine now. Then they move down in terms of age, but also those with underlying health conditions that make them particularly vulnerable. It does mean, however, that you would only get to vaccines for 60 to 70-year-olds sort of March time on the current projections. The game changer will be if we can get approval for the Oxford vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, because we've got more doses of that, and also it can be used at a reduced dose to get the same effectiveness. And crucially, it doesn't have to be kept in sub-zero Arctic temperatures, so you can move people around much more freely. So I think if we get approval for that vaccine by the end of the year, we can bring forward and accelerate that. And then the ambition would be that by March, you would have everybody aged 50 vaccinated and all vulnerable people vaccinated, as well as key workers. What we're trying to push the government to do is to link the exit strategy or relaxation of restrictions to the level of vaccination. If they suddenly manage to vaccinate the most vulnerable, the over 70s, then we should be able to move out of restrictions more quickly in hospitality.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think we all agree that once people who are likely to be very ill or die have been taken out of the equation and can now remain healthy, that there surely can't be any reason for keeping everybody else and really killing the economy. Now, I've got another one here. We have tried to apply for the LRSG grants, but we have had to agree to a declaration that we have not had more than £800,000 in state aid. Does furlough, business rate relief, EOTHO, etc., class as state aid for that calculation?
The short answer is no for most of those. All of the sort of furlough, the business support, Eat Out to Help Out, none of that is classed as state aid. The only thing that counts as state aid is the grants, the hospitality grants that were covered, which was £25,000 per premises earlier this year. For anybody who received that, that counts towards their state aid calculation. And that is that's a group calculation as well. So if you've got multiple sites, if you've got 3 sites, 4 sites more, that counts. The 800,000 is an annual limit. So it will apply from March this year. The good news is that anybody who is getting towards that limit, but you do have to be having quite a number of multiple sites to be able to get to that limit. So it's more likely to affect the Hiltons of this world or the large restaurant chains. That limit is being lifted to 3 million. So I think you can safely self-declare that you're not receiving state aid.
I think Richard will be pleased with that answer. He's also asked, outside of the Christmas period, can we still accommodate guests from tier 3 areas if the purpose of their stay is for work or essential travel?
Yes, you can. Effectively, the rules for tier 3 and the tier 3 people are the same as in national lockdown. So provided that they confirm to you that it's essential travel, it's essential business, or they're attending a funeral or it's emergency medical care, you are allowed to accept them. But a very good idea to be able to make sure you've got due diligence records recording that and that you have a check. Your obligation as a hotelier is to make your customers aware, or your potential customers aware, of the restrictions within which they are operating and you are operating. So you need to make sure you've got something on your website about, if you are from tier 3, these are the only reasons you should be traveling, and we will only be able to take a booking from you in those circumstances.
And interestingly, Kate, sort of as an addendum to that, I've got Nicholas Dickinson has asked, am I right in thinking the rules on moving out of tier 3 areas is guidance rather than law? You say we are supposed not to accept bookings from people living in tier 3 areas, but is it not down to the individual traveller to decide based on their own risk assessment?
Well, this is a slight grey area. You are right that the rules on travelling inside and outside tier 3 areas, because also you are restricted as a customer if you're in a tier 3 area in going and booking anywhere else. Because remember, these tier areas are really quite large. So you could live in Kent and still take a weekend break or an overnight in another part of the county, or equally another part of the northeast, where it's a huge area. It is guidance for those customers, and it is the customer's obligation to make sure that they're not breaching it. But there is a very strong recommendation that they are not allowed, they should not be traveling, and they should not be doing an overnight. Equally for the hotelier, there is a legal requirement to make sure that you are not inadvertently breaking the law or allowing people to break the law. But your due diligence requirement and the legal requirement is to make sure that you are clear with your bookers or potential bookers as to what the regulations are. So theoretically, yes, you are not required to go through your lists, you are not required to check postcodes, and you're not required to proactively contact the consumer. But you should be making sure that you are helping them and not allowing them to break the law.
I have a question now from Peter Hancock. Not surprisingly, bearing in mind he's the chief executive of a group of hotels that cover the whole of our United Kingdom. Kate, do you expect Wales and Scotland to apply tougher measures than England for the December the 22nd to the 28th?
No, those rules were set and agreed by the 4 devolved administrations that there would be a festive relaxation. There are 2 areas where they are applying a slightly stricter interpretation. So in Scotland, if you are going to stay in a hotel in Scotland, you need to be staying, somebody within the festive bubble has to be resident in that local authority area. So you couldn't all decide that from the sort of 3 or 4 parts of the country, or 3 or 4 different parts of Scotland, you could all converge on Edinburgh and meet festively in your bubble in Edinburgh. You would have to have one of your bubble resident in Edinburgh. I could go and stay in a hotel in Edinburgh because my sister lives there. We couldn't both go and stay up in the wilds of Scotland and have a festive break together. So that is a slightly tougher interpretation that Scotland has. And currently Wales has a restriction on people travelling into Wales from high-risk areas in England and Scotland. So we don't yet know whether that will be lifted. We do know that the 4 devolved administrations are meeting today and will be giving out guidance to people about what they should be doing over that festive period, but we don't expect there to be fundamental change this close to the booking period.
Thanks, Kate. How long do tier 3s tend to stay in place? Because obviously a number of places today have gone into tier 3. You mentioned earlier, you don't expect any sort of change when it's looked at in a week's time. But, should we be thinking 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks? What's the sort of typical feel?
It's very difficult to be able to say. The sage scientists advising the government say that you need 3 weeks before you can see whether a measure is having an effect. So I think in reality, the minimum is 3 weeks. If you look at Liverpool, who were the first ones to go into tier 3, they went in for sort of 2 weeks before the national lockdown that was 4 weeks. So they were in and they saw cases coming down after about 4 to 5 weeks being in those restrictions, but their restrictions lasted for 6 weeks. Manchester effectively has been in tier 2 restrictions since August, as has Leicester. The Northeast has been in those severe restrictions for a long period of time. I mean, this is one of the points we're making to government, that you're ratcheting up the restrictions on hospitality and you're putting them in place and cases are still going up. So clearly you've got the wrong control measures and it's not having the right effect. But I would have thought if you're looking at a minimum, your 4 to 6 weeks is probably the minimum.
Thank you. I think it's quite interesting that the usually polite hoteliers that we meet and enjoy dinners together and help each other in our businesses, there's a definite feel that they're getting angrier and they're certainly getting more vociferous. And there are a couple of particular things that I think, and I've got several sort of questions have come in about these things. One is this whole sort of compensation issue. And I know you touched on that earlier, but Serena von der Heide said, speaking to fellow hoteliers from France and Germany, it seems that they have received high levels of grant. We have been supporting a negative cash flow for 9 months now with no grant support. Is there any likelihood of new grants being made available? And I think probably Serena is thinking very much of what France and Germany have done in terms of giving percentages of revenues or profits to establishments. And we've actually had nothing like that, although we do appreciate we've had the furlough scheme.
Yes, I mean, the government is increasingly pushing back quite strongly on suggestions of extra compensation and extra support. And they would point to the business rates holiday, the VAT cut and furlough, as well as cash grants for smaller businesses. It's quite true that the bigger businesses have not had cash grants. We know that Scotland and Wales are both looking at bigger cash grants, and Scotland in particular has a large hotels fund that people are bidding into. So there is a discrepancy within the UK as well as across to Europe. We have put forward the proposals to number 10 and number 11 about what's happened in France and Germany. where you've got 20% in France of lost revenue up to a maximum of 10,000, and in Germany 50% of lost revenue up to a maximum of 500,000. So they are bigger quantums of support that is coming through. We're pushing really hard for compensation for lost revenue because it is, as Serena says, very difficult. In terms of grant support, it depends on which tier you went into, but there are two forms of grant support. If you are closed by legislation, you get £3,000 per month. So businesses now that are closed and in tier 3 will get that. And 2,100 if you are open but your trade is severely restricted, and that dates back to when you went into tier restrictions. So for London that would be the 17th of October, and for Manchester that goes back to the 1st of August, but they're very slow in coming out, and I appreciate that those are very small amounts of money for the substantial losses that are being received. So we are still continuing to press, as well as the longer term support of VAT and business rates, to have a compensatory grant.
Do you think there would be anything to be gained with our industry joining together with the travel industry and the performing arts industry, because we're the sectors that are so badly hit by every decision that the government takes, much more severely hit than any other section of the economy. Do you think there's anything to be gained by those sectors coming together to lobby Parliament for more compensation?
I think it's easier to keep hospitality separate because it is such a, it's a more emotive subject for people than tourism and travel, where there isn't the same level of employment, and they are going through structural change as far as the government is concerned. It's a bit the same as retail. Government looks at retail, looks at travel and tourism, and sees long-term structural change that is coming through for those businesses that will need to function differently when they come out of COVID. Whereas for hospitality, they see us differently. They see us as being, and it works against us when it comes to compensatory grants, they see us as being a viable business. Once restrictions are lifted, demand will return. Our message now is you are in danger of killing the supply because we are not going to be viable for too much longer. Yes, we will bounce back, but if you rubber band too much, it will eventually snap and it won't bounce back, and we're at that point now. So I think we're probably better ploughing a hospitality furrow. What I do think we need to be doing, though, is segmenting hospitality when it comes to reopening. And I do think we need to be splitting off hotels and holiday accommodation and that sort of leisure business from the high street hospitality, because demand in high street hospitality comes back the next day. It starts, it's more gradual, but ours takes longer to be able to rebuild. And therefore, we need to have confirmation of earlier reopening with fewer restrictions to get consumers back to booking.
Thank you. I mean, you and your team have managed to make government listen and to take note of hospitality, which is amazing. And we all thank you very much for that. We really appreciate that you've all done that, your team and you have done that. Do you think they're still listening to us as much as they were?
I think they are listening. It might not feel like it. I think what they've moved on from, and this is partly as a result of the vaccine, they can now see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they just keep now pushing back to say, well, hang on for a couple more months. And I thought that would mean that they would act more quickly now that they had an end in sight to say, and here's the support to get you through there. It does seem as though the taps have been turned off. I think that they are still listening, they're hearing, they understand the pain. But that battle at the heart of government, and let's not forget, there are only about 4 or 5 people who run the government, make the decisions between the needs of the economy and the needs of health. At the moment, health is just dominating. We get through to the vaccine. So I think they're listening. And they're hearing, and it's not translating through to action in the same way that it did earlier in this year. And that's incredibly frustrating for all of us, my team included.
And that brings me on to the next sort of big question, big area that we've had a lot of comment about and a lot of questions. You probably know where this one's going. And this is the Seat at the Table initiative. I know that you were at that meeting we were all at with Robin Hudson. For anybody who's on the call who doesn't know what happened, basically, some time ago, a petition request was set up. It needs 100,000 signatures in order to be considered by government at all, to be debated. It's not guaranteed, but it won't be considered unless it hits 100,000. And after some considerable time, we'd only reached 40,000. So Robin decided that this was not good enough, and we needed to bring the industry together. And in fact, within 1 week of the launch of that, we got up to 140,000. So we got another 100,000 in that week. But we're all very keen, obviously, to press on with this and to get even more signatures so that we can really show government that people really do care about this. And Danny Pecorelli has said, you know, now the Seat at the Table campaign has reached over 100,000 signatures. What's your advice on what hoteliers should do next? And I know Harry Murray will be very interested in this as well, because Harry has been really pushing this forward and trying to engage with as many people as possible in order to get the signatures. Of course, we all know that once the debate happens, that's only the beginning of the struggle to get somewhere. But so Danny has said, what is your advice on what hoteliers should do next?
I think the first thing to say is please don't relax anything about getting more and more signatures. Getting over 100,000 just secures you a debate. But given that there are 3.2 million people who work in the industry and we have 60 million a week coming through our doors, we need to just get those signature levels up. Because when it comes to the debate, if it just remains at that 100, 140 level, it's more easily dismissed as being, you know, not hugely relevant, that the industry doesn't see the importance of it. So we do need to keep up that pressure and continue the campaign to get more and more signatures. So, you know, contact all of your staff, contact all of your friends, colleagues, customers. If you've got contacts with famous people, that gets the signatures up very easily. So any of your celebrity chefs or sort of restaurant critics that you work with, getting that out there on the social media channels over the next 3-4 weeks is going to be important. So that when we get the debate, and I believe we have now got a date for the debate in January, it has to happen in the House of Commons as soon as you hit 100,000. But it'll be great by the time that debate happens to have 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 would be a real signal of the desire for support and the indication that the industry does not feel it is getting the support it needs. And then I think it's about focusing on the debate, and the next step would be to write to your local MPs, and we will provide the briefing notes and we'll provide the briefing ahead of the debate, to ask them to turn up at the debate, to participate in the debate if they can. There's nothing to stop you from contacting and asking an MP to sign the petition. Most won't, but you can do it. But I think that's the next step, writing to the MP to show them that this debate is happening, that it's important to you, to ask them to attend and to ask them to put pressure on the government to give a Minister for Hospitality. The main reason being that we need to have a domestic focus, and we need to get the government to focus on tourism as a domestic industry. They always look at the international. It's fantastic. International tourism is important, particularly if you are in London, but it's 39 billion out of a total revenue of 139 billion. So if we are to rebuild the revenues of the industry, and we are to rebuild our balance of payments, and we're to encourage people to go out and get the spend up, it's going to be our domestic tourists first and foremost. And that's why you need a Minister for Hospitality as well as a Minister for Tourism.
Right. So it's definitely, we should be looking to get as close to 500,000 signatures as we possibly can. And of course, the reality is we're going to do that not by just dealing with our staff and our and people who work alongside us and suppliers, but really much wider. We've got to start spreading it to our own social networks, our own friends, our own people we know in all sorts of works, and then asking them to forward it and pass it on.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we need to get it out into the general public. We need to show the government there's a groundswell of support and opinion and good feeling for the industry from the general public. And obviously that will be dependent on how you feel about communicating with your customers. But clearly, you know, you've got a couple of opportunities that over this Christmas period where you're writing to people saying, I'm really sorry that we can't take your booking, or they're writing to you saying, I want to cancel my booking. You know, please, you can use that opportunity to say, you know, please express your concern to the government, your dissatisfaction to the government by signing this petition. And that will be dependent on your own communications. But yes, getting it out to the general public, to our friends and families, and asking them to pass it on through their social media.
Right. Well, I've got on one last thing on that point. How likely do you think that it is that we will be granted a Minister of Hospitality before the pandemic ends and when we most desperately need help?
Well, I think the answer that the government gave to the original petition, because when you get petitions, you hit a certain level and the government has to respond formally in writing. You hit another level and they have to respond through a debate. The initial response back was that they'd established a hospitality unit within the business department in response to the pandemic, and the Minister for Small Businesses had been meeting hospitality businesses throughout the pandemic, as had the tourism minister. So I think we are moving in the right direction of getting that formally established, and that would be a quick and easy way for government to do it. What we then need to look at is what their portfolios are, what their focus is, and the seniority of that minister within government. Because at the moment, our tourism minister, our de facto hospitality minister, and the pubs minister within the communities department, they're all at the most junior level. So they don't wield sufficient power, and we want to make sure we've got a minister with the remit and responsibility. Yeah,
well, that's very true. It is the level at which we get them, and we need to be higher than the sort of private secretary level we seem to have at the moment. And Harry also makes the point, and he will be popular with some and unpopular with others for making this point. He says, thank you for Kate. He'll be popular with everybody for saying that, for covering the petition. I appeal to everyone to look at the map on the petition. Some areas are less than 200 and London is very poor. So it does appear that for some reason, London doesn't have as many signatures. I do wonder whether today's change in life in London may focus a number of minds to actually go ahead and sign that. We've also got a couple of people who've suggested that you should be made the Minister of Hospitality, as if you hadn't got enough to do.
Yes, but I think you really need me on your side of the fence lobbying that minister rather than being that minister themselves. Because if I was to be Minister of Hospitality, I think I'd have to be an MP first.
No, you could go to the House of Lords.
I think I'd suit Ermin, but yes.
You would.
But you want me on your side of the fence lobbying that minister.
We do, but we still hope you'll be Lady Nichols of Bishop Auckland. Kate, what is your prediction for us being able to host larger events and weddings next year?
Well, I'm pretty confident we will be able to do so. The event sector, business events, are now able to be hosted up to a maximum of 1,000 indoors, provided the space is socially distanced. So it depends on your space. And I do think for weddings, that's an important principle that we can build on. We need to get the government through its anxiety about letting people travel from different parts of the country, which is what causes the concern at the moment. That's what they're fearful about. So as soon as we can get them through that, then I'm confident we will be able to reopen and be able to host larger events and weddings next year. So events you can host now, provided they're business events. It's only day events, though. You're not supposed to have an event that bridges the overnight, although you can host people in the hotel, clearly, if they are booking in separately, but you can't have a 2-day event. But it can be up to 1,000 people, provided it's socially distanced and depending on the space. Weddings, it's currently just 15, but I would have anticipated that you would be able to get to larger weddings, and the capacity would be based on the size and space of the venue rather than an arbitrary cap towards towards Easter next year. As I say, the thing with weddings is overnight stays, and as soon as we can get the overnight stays bit fixed, you will be able to reopen.
Wonderful. I know we're beginning to run out of time, but we've just there's a lot of there have been a lot of questions today, so a couple more if I may. Sue Matthews asks, can anything be done on insurance? No payments for loss of business, no payments for lost stock, still paying for irrelevant insurance as we've been closed most of the year, based up in the northeast. Just renewed at increased rates, not even a discount or a refund. She then, with a large exclamation mark, says it's a disgrace. And I think probably everybody on this call, and can I say, we normally have about 150 people come to these calls, but well over 2,000 people view these talks that you give us, Kate, on YouTube, because obviously not everybody can get away from their desks. But basically, I think we'd all agree it is a bloody disgrace.
It is, and it's one we've raised with government several times, particularly around the increased rate of insurance coming through now. What we're hearing from a lot of operators is that they're having to pay more for less cover, particularly around business interruption insurance. So we are urgently working with the government to see if they can do something similar to what they did to get live theatre and live music events opened, which was to underwrite some of the insurance where people couldn't get insurance for business interruption. We are waiting the outcome of the court case, which should be within the next week or so, and that may result in the unlocking of some payments by insurers, but we are keeping the pressure on.
We've had another comment that why doesn't government use the military to speed up vaccinations? This would help save our businesses, jobs, livelihoods, plus the mental and physical health of the nation, especially our employees. The government's made a complete mess of PPE, says someone, and should avoid similar problems with this vaccine.
I have no doubt that they will look at using the military in due course, and also they will look at using, they're talking to us about potentially using empty hotels as mass vaccination centres. The problem is the current vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, which we've got, can only be moved 4 times. So at the moment, cold storage in hospitals and central healthcare settings, and it can't be moved more widely. So we need to wait until we get the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine before you can look at mass vaccination programs. So I'm sure the military will be front of mind when that comes through.
Are we expecting announcements later today? I think you did touch on this, that may change the tiers in the rest of the country, or has it been pushed out by a week?
No, I think we may still get some indications either today or tomorrow is when we're due to get that for the rest of the country. I'm not expecting big changes, but we are still expecting something this week and next.
Great. Serena has asked that we might send out the link again to the petition, which we will do. And then I've got one here from a great supporter from slightly outside our industry. Kate, on behalf of the suppliers to the hotel industry, thank you for your combined and continued effort to fight for getting the industry back on track. As a supplier to the hotel industry for 32 years, we are certainly feeling the financial pain and stresses that the whole industry is feeling. And your support is equally as important for us as suppliers as it is directly for the industry. And they thank you again. And I suppose that is absolutely right, that, you know, as we say in so many of our figures, 3 million jobs, but another 1.5 million jobs beyond that. You know, billions of pounds of direct revenue, but many more billions for other people who are making it.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think unlike other industries, often many people in our supply chain are exclusive suppliers to hospitality. So they don't have somewhere else to go back to. I know some of the food manufacturers, some of the food wholesalers have a small amount of other business, but the hospitality supply subsidizes their business and it allows them to continue. I mean, the best way we can get suppliers supported and the supply chain supported is to get hospitality reopen with as few restrictions as possible. Then we can support our supply chain. But we have managed to secure grant funding now for some of the suppliers. So there is discretionary funding available through local authorities. So anybody who is in the supply chain can apply to the local authority for a discretionary grant. And there are bigger grants available for the supply chain in Scotland and Wales. So people need to make sure that they reach out and talk to their local authorities and get the help that they might be entitled to.
Kate, thank you very much indeed. That really brings us to the end of the questions, and we did have an awful lot of questions there. I tried to summarize some of them into one question. You've been a great support to us in our leading through the revival, that wonderful revival that we so hope will come at some point. But you've been a tremendous help, and you've been on a number of these calls for us. And as I said earlier, although the number of people on the call is usually about the 150 mark, the number of people watching it in the 2 or 3 days afterwards usually is over 2,000. So it makes a huge difference. We really appreciate you giving up your time for us. We totally appreciate what you're doing for us, and I've said that before. And so, I mean, really, we've come to the end of this. We've come to the end of our series for 2020 of leading through the hoped for revival. I thank you, particularly Kate, and all your team. We know that it's not just you. We know that there's a group of people behind working tirelessly for us. I also want to thank Georgia and Petra at Custer Communications, who actually make all this happen. And they do it quite well. They mute me when they don't want me to say anything. I'm muted a lot. And they really seem to work this very well. And Wallace back at the secretary is doing a great job. And thank you to our sponsors. They came into the year and sponsored us for this incredible conference we had, but there isn't going to be an incredible on-site conference. We're going to change to something else in March that is going to be, we hope, very interesting to everybody, but it will be a different style of communication and way in which we can engage and sort of help people through what's going on now. But thank you to our sponsors. You continue to support us, and you're very, very, very important to us. And finally, seat at the table, go away. If you're watching this on video afterwards, go away and talk to people and get them to sign that petition. You heard it here that Kate thinks we need to be 400,000 to 500,000 to really show government that we're serious. So go and chat to your celebrity friends, and I know many of the people on this call are surrounded constantly by celebrity friends, and so do what you can. Kate, thank you very much again, and may we wish you all a Merry Christmas. I think you've probably got a bit more work to do before we get there.
Yes, just a little bit of work, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you, because it is really important that we get as many people aware of the work that we're doing at UK Hospitality as we can. All of the resources on our website are free. There's lots of advice, information, and it changes and is updated on a daily basis. So please make the use of that. And thank you to all of the members of the Master Inn holders for their support for me and the team throughout the year. It really has helped to keep us going, and it helps us to get the message across effectively to government. So thank you for all you're doing.
And please let us know if there's anything else we can do. We stand here to support you in every way we can, because we do. Now we've got one voice, we seem to be getting more resonance at the table. So thank you again. Thank you everybody who's joined us, and thank you for all of you who are going to be watching this in the next 2 or 3 days. And we wish you all, wherever you are, a very Merry Christmas, and hope that most of you will at least see some customers over that period. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Kate.